Welcome to Being Boss, a podcast for creatives, business owners, and entrepreneurs who want to take control of their work and live life on their own terms. I'm your host, Emily Thompson, and this is a special episode, in that it's one of the last episodes of Being Boss as you know it. I'm joined by my friend and previous co-host Kathleen to dive into what's happening here, how I've come to my decisions, and begin peeking into what's next. This is the first of the final 5 episodes that will take you on a journey of what's worked, kind of worked, and hasn't worked in this business, in this industry, and economical environment, and what's next for Being Boss. You can find all the tools, books, and links we reference on the show notes at www.beingboss.club. And if you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to this show and share us with a friend. And you should still subscribe because this is the end as we know it, but we're not done. Kathleen Shannon is the co-founder and former co-host of the Being Boss podcast, joining me for the first 240-ish episodes of this show with several one-off episodes since. Kathleen is a partner and creative director at Braid Creative, a branding agency she founded with her sister over 10 years ago. Kathleen has always lived by capturing, shaping, and sharing who she is, whether that's with a blog post, a podcast, or on social media. Hi, Kathleen.
Hi, Emily.
Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do this.
Ready for some of the last episodes of what the world knows as the Being Boss podcast?
I mean, have you told them already that this is
Not
happening?
Really. I mean, I think I'm going to do an intro to this particular episode where I'm like, here's the shtick. But I do also just want to throw it in here that that's one of the reasons why you come back for a little while, because we haven't been very clear about that. I was telling Kathleen a couple months ago that this was coming, and she was like, well, let me come back and play as much as I can. And I was like, come on, girl, let's do it.
Yeah. I mean, might as well.
How are you feeling about it?
Full circle. I mean, I feel like I'm thinking a lot about what I've learned from doing Being Boss and leaving Being Boss and our relationship that's come from it. And there's so many things that I could talk about. And I'll talk about those maybe on our next episode that we record on this. But really, at the end of the day, I feel really excited for you. And I feel like nothing is permanent. Everything is always changing. If you're always trying to fit into what's been done and where you found success and trying to like just do the same thing over and over and over again, you're going to stop growing. You're not going to be pushing yourself into what could be. You're closing the door to new opportunities because you're scared of opening those doors, right? Because you've got to close another door. Here I am with my terrible metaphors again.
I think it may be what we're most known for, actually. Of all the things, that's actually it. No, I think you're right. I know you're right. You are absolutely right in saying those things. I see people do it all the time. They do find success in one little thing and they refuse to shift and change, even though the world does around them. And I think everyone will see over the next couple of conversations that really is what this keeps coming back to is the world is different and it's time for a change. And I'm not going to sit here and continue spinning my wheels or wishing that the world was different or whatever. I'm going to make necessary changes to move in the directions where things just make sense.
And I can't lie, like there's a little part of me that's kind of glad for me in a selfish way, because I'm not going to have any more FOMO about it. There is a thing with you having continued on with it where I can't help but wonder, did I make the right choice? And I've been really secure in my choice of having you buy me out in 2020. But yeah, of course, there's moments where I missed you and I missed what we created and I missed working together and I missed the Being Boss community and the vacations and all the things that we did. So it kind of reminds me of, whenever I got divorced from my first husband, we still had a house together for many, many years, even after the divorce. And whenever we finally sold it, it was the last thing kind of connecting us. It felt like such a weight off of my shoulders. And this isn't that, because you and I still have a really tight relationship, but not owning anything together anymore is kind of, I don't know. It's like, it's just kind of feeling really clean slate in a way, because I'm so tied to what Being Boss is. And I'm so tied to us having created that together, that for it to finally be changing into something else completely, it feels like a release of sorts. What do you think about that?
Good.
Am I an asshole for saying
No, I
that?
love that for you. No, well, not for that reason. Just kidding. You're not an asshole. No, I think that's lovely. And I'm glad that you feel that way. I'm glad that you have maintained, I mean, obviously you have, but I'm glad that you've maintained such a connection to it that you can feel that, and that the feelings have, remained so good that you're not like, it's not like a sort of an angry release, but just like you've missed it and there has been a bit of FOMO, and now you don't have to worry about it. We can just move on and, do whatever we're doing. So I think that's lovely. I'm glad those are your feelings.
Yeah. So, how do you want to do this episode? Should we start with like a little bit of a recap, starting with maybe when you bought me out? Because I would say that was one of the big pivotal moments of change for being boss. And it keeps, there have been iterations and changes along the way. So, whenever you bought me out in 2020, did you struggle with deciding whether or not to keep it or to change it more drastically then? What was your vision at that point?
Yeah, I think this is a really great place to start, because as I've made these decisions and move forward, and I also want to throw in here, I feel like we'll talk about this a couple times, but like I made the decision that being boss would be making a very big pivot. And we'll talk more about what that looks like and all the things. I feel like this is going to be a big unraveling conversation over the next couple of episodes. And one that I hope, that I know will be woven with so many important lessons for anyone doing business, which is probably most of you listening. So I've gone back to that time many times over the past year, because a year ago, I made the decision that being boss is about to start making a very big transition out of what it is, either to no longer exist or into something completely different. So it's been a year that I've been sitting on this and sort of making my maneuverings. And it really was going back to those conversations that I was having with you and with David and with myself more than anybody. In 2019, 2020, when we started a partial buyout in 2019, finished it in 2020, those two episodes in 2019 about the burnout and buyout were really probably the last time we sort of had a strategic conversation as to what's happening at being boss and like how all of this is shaped up and why we're making the decisions that we're making, et cetera. And at that point, I remember making sort of a loose promise to myself, not like I swear this is how it's going to, happen, but it was more like I'm committing myself in some capacity to giving being boss a good hard go alone for 5 years. Right? That was like my marker. And now in 2023, that was 4 years ago. Like I'm very much so getting to the strategic end of something that I sort of said to myself way back then. And so that's been a really big part of it, is as I have gone through the past couple of years, has been really looking at that 5-year timeline and going, we're getting closer and closer. What is this going to look like? What's working? What's not working? All of those things. So it's 4 years in. I wanted to keep it because I wasn't done yet. And you were, which totally honored and loved that for you. I remember you several times saying, like, I've said it. I've said everything that I need to say.
Yeah.
And I will say that, like, I've finally gotten to that point. Like, I have felt that very much so over the past or probably the past year. But in 2019, I didn't feel that. I felt like I still had some things I wanted to say and some things that I wanted to do. And I needed a bit more time to do it. And at that point as well, Almanac was still a baby. And because I wasn't going to go get a job by any means, I was going to stay in the business that was doing the thing, that being boss, while I strategized a transition into Almanac. So it was really a way for me. I was buying myself time, basically. I was literally buying myself 4, 5, 6 years to make Almanac into the business that I wanted it to be, while having the fallback of being boss, doing the thing And it allowed me to keep a brand that we had already created and put so much equity into it to do the things that I most wanted to do. And that was masterminds, events, and an online community. Those were the three things whenever I bought the buyout. That was to be the business model. It was something we had done all of those things for a long time in some capacity or another. Whenever I was imagining shutting Deep Being Boss down at that point, that's what I was going to go do until Almanac was big enough to support me in the way that I wanted it to. But by keeping Being Boss, I was able to do that under the brand that we had already built. So I had given myself 5 years. I wanted to do masterminds, events, and the online community. And that's what I did.
And those three things were all deal breakers for me because you had that vision probably even before the buyout. And that was part of me. That was probably the most contentious part of our separation, was just that vision for what's next. And I was like, I'm just here to podcast. And I had so much anxiety around the events part of it and the online community. And especially going into 2020, things just online were getting really contentious and hostile and volatile, so it's interesting how moving along in your journey as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, as a person in the world, in relationships, how it can kind of change past events a little bit. Like it can reform your memories around things, right? So like, for example, whenever you have a kid, it kind of makes you take a look back at your own childhood and what that was. And you remember things a little bit differently through the lens of who you are now. So one thing I just want to mention from my part of the journey of being boss and that buyout and all of it is I was under so much anxiety. And now, having been on anti-anxiety medicine and getting some therapy for a little bit, I can say I think that part of it, of me leaving and the buyout and all of it, was just crippling anxiety. Like the anxiety of like, what if someone gets hurt at one of our events? Or what if we hurt someone's feelings in the online community? What if there's there's a lot of like just what ifs wrapped up in a lot of fear. And it was fear that you didn't have. You had just the total confidence going into it that it was going to work and be amazing. And it did work for you and it was amazing. So I'm curious if through the lens of having grown, maybe even since the beginning of being boss, but specifically since, let's say 2020, since that was also kind of like there's a before and after whenever it comes to 2020 in a being boss sense, and then also in a world and global sense. So I'm curious to hear from you. Has who you've become right now informed any of your memories on that buyout or any of your feelings on being boss over the past 3 years?
Great question. Yes and no. Yes or no, in that I feel like so much of me is the same me, or especially like how I go at being boss and the things that I've wanted from it and how we've moved forward. Yes, in that one of those things was events, right?
Yeah.
And almost immediately upon starting a partial buyout, immediately I launched a conference, sold a lot of tickets, paid a whole lot of money to a whole lot of vendors, and was planning a whole ass conference in April of 2020. And I had to cancel it a month before. Lost enough money to make most people barf in their mouth, right? Within the course of a week. And I remember that being the point where you were like, no, for real though, I'm all the way out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Because that was a really ugly time, I think, in the history of being boss, and not one that had anything to do with anything other than a global pandemic that everyone was affected by. Right. And then for the, next 4 years, no events. So that big piece, which was a big piece for marketing, for revenue, for community building, for really supporting all the other things that I wanted to do, was immediately cut out of even like real possibility, because I was never going to do an event in 2021 that was going to be a super spreader. Like I was not trying to be the first one out of the conference gate again. Even vacations and going to some of the places that I was going, I was hearing stories of people going out in the world for the first time and losing their shit right? Like unable to control themselves in public places where booze may be flowing free.
Right.
And things like that. And like, so I actually got all of your anxiety around events after that.
You're
And
welcome.
the team has tried to get me right many times over the past couple of years to do another conference or a vacation or whatever. We've set dates half a dozen times. And every time it gets time to actually doing it, I cannot do it. I just cannot. And part of it's like PTSD from losing all of that money. And part of it too is I don't want to be responsible for humans anymore out in the real world, not on that scale.
Right.
And so I definitely gained a lot. I took all of your anxiety around events and instilled it in myself in a way that has kept me from moving forward with like the number one reason that I wanted to keep being boss, which has made this decision in this time and space even easier. Because I did want to do this thing. And now that we're a couple years into it, like I could probably start doing some things now. And I've done small retreats and I love doing those. But when it comes to doing large scale events, I have literally zero desire. Is that the sweetest sound on the internet or what? That's the sound of another sale, another dollar, another customer on your Shopify e-commerce store. For years, that sound has told me that I'm being boss, no matter where I am or what I'm doing, as a longtime user of Shopify, the commerce platform revolutionizing millions of businesses worldwide. Whether you're selling crystals and candles like me, or you're selling your artwork, your planners, your tarot decks, or your seriously cool t-shirts, Shopify simplifies selling online and in person, so you can focus on successfully growing your business. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/beingboss, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/beingboss to take your business to the next level today. Shopify.com/beingboss.
So I'm curious to hear more about the Being Boss business model, because whenever we were doing it at the beginning, the business model was centered around podcasting. And then as you bought me out in 2020, that business model was going to pivot and kind of shift around online community, events, masterminds. How else has the model changed, and how does like the podcasting arm of it still, like how has that changed as well?
Yeah, so actually, in a lot of ways, it's very much so the same. It's still very much so podcast sponsors. And in the next episode in particular, we're going to talk about all how podcasting has changed, because I think this is probably one of the most fascinating pieces of sort of being in this place, in this business, in this moment, is I have insight into the podcasting industry, unlike most people. And I'm very excited to dive into that. And sponsor models
I cannot wait to talk about this.
It's been a huge part of it. A huge part of it. It's gonna be a juicy one, everybody. I got some tea to spill for sure. So we're gonna be talking about that. But sponsors have stayed the majority of our business model. So revenue generation, that has stayed very much so the same, for better or worse, because there have been pros and cons to that. Community has made up a bit of it ongoing, I'd say, 10, 15, 20% sort of fluctuating here and there, depending on what we're doing. And then obviously events have been zero. And we've done some other things. We still have CEO Day Kit. We've played with a couple of other things over time and just sort of seen what works and doesn't work. But the hardest part about this, and I didn't really recognize it until we couldn't do them anymore. And there was this sort of an interesting fluctuation, because in 2020, when we lost the ability to do events, everyone needed community, right? And so the online community actually did really well in that time in a way that I don't think it would have in quite the same capacity, because everyone was stuck at home and needed a space to connect with other people. So the community did really, really well in 2020 as we lost events. But then it became really obvious to me how much our events had bolstered both our podcast and our community over the years. How much that like really lended to marketing and growth of the audience and of the community and all of these things. And so by cutting that arm off, I was walking around limbless. Like I lost a very important part, not only of revenue generation in that one sort of arm itself, but in how that one arm lended itself to the podcast and its growth, to the community and its growth. I had never really seen or felt how big the impact was until the impact was no longer there.
Interesting. So I want to hear more about Almanac. So Almanac has been in business for how many years now?
5 since 2018.
So since
5.
2018.
Yeah.
How has that changed since 2020? And earlier you did say that being boss was buying you some time to kind of build up that business. What has happened since 2020 for Almanac?
Lots of things. Lots of things has happened at Almanac and all really good things. And again, I always saw the buying of being boss or like the full acquisition of it as buying time for Almanac to do its thing. And that 5 years that I get, that timeline that I gave myself was really like, I'm going to need 5 years for Almanac to be where it is that I want it to be. It was less so of like my interest in being boss, though, I mean, that definitely played a part in it, and more so of a strategic, like, I'm going to give myself 5 years to make Almanac amazing so that financially, personally, I can make that transition in a way that felt good. And we expected Almanac to take the biggest hit in 2020. We immediately furloughed employees just to sort of like make sure that we were really hunkering down in the way that we needed to, took them off furlough way quicker than we expected because everyone was sitting at home shopping. And everyone just needed to pray on some rocks that the world would be set right again or whatever, or like needed candles because they're working at home and their cats smell weird or like whatever. Like we were getting all kinds of customers coming to us and in a way that we never had. So online sales for us in 2020 were amazeballs, as well as 2021. And we were doing some things like, more online crystal parties. That really took off in 2020. And it's something that we're still doing now. We stayed in our office space for a long time. We were doing shop by appointments. We were just doing all of these things to keep ourselves going. And it was working, but also the environment that we were in was really playing into our success as well. People were at home, not shit else to do, buying candles and crystals. Loved that for them and for us, for sure. And then in 2021, I guess, we got the opportunity to open a small shop. It's the space that I'm currently sitting in to record this episode in one of the cutest neighborhoods in Chattanooga. I remember going to the grocery store one day and looking over, and there was a big sign in the window that this tiny space that used to have an olive oil business in it. I came in here lots of times along the way, and it was one of the businesses that shut down during the early pandemic. And so this space was available. So we called, the rent was hysterically cheap, and we just got it. Even though like it made no sense, we're still in the middle of a global pandemic. How are we going to open a shop? I also remember tweeting at that point. It was the week that Russia invaded Ukraine.
Oh.
And I remember tweeting that like, would anybody sign a lease right now? And everyone was like, absolutely not.
Right.
Actually, that's a lie. I think we actually signed that lease. That was the second space. That we signed a 5-year lease. So, okay, first space though, we move into this small space and business just takes off because that summer everyone wanted to like get out into the world again. And we went back and forth in August whenever that other variant came around. We shut down the shop and did appointment only. And so there was only 1 or 2 people, mask required, in the store. In Tennessee, we were one of the last places that required masks and got yelled at all the time. And y'all, I loved it. Like, come at me, bro. Absolutely. So like we were doing physical business in a really hard time. 9 months into having this space, we got the opportunity to move across the street in my dream space, which we've talked about here on the show before. I had wanted this space since before I had Almanac. It was like 10 years ago. I was coming to Chattanooga, shopping in this cute little store in this space on the main tourist strip in Chattanooga. Heard they were closing down, another sort of pandemic casualty. And we snatched it as quickly as we possibly could. We did sign that 5-year lease the week that Russia invaded Ukraine, and did not know if that was a good decision or not, but it was all happening so easily that I kind of had to. So Almanac went from, barely supporting 2 or 3 of us to now there's a team of a dozen of us doing the thing. We are selling so many rocks and candles. We're producing new product lines. We are growing online. We are doing the thing in a way that feels so good and so easy, especially compared to what being boss has become, that it's like night and day, the two companies, in some really interesting ways. So Almanac has really grown. I thought in 2019, when I was making that call, that it would be 5 years, that in 5 years, I would open a store. Not in 2.5 years, I would open a store. 9 months later, open a bigger store. And then in 5 years, maybe looking at store number 2 at some point in the near future. Like, I had no idea that Almanac would grow as quickly as it did, especially while I was straddling 2 businesses.
Right.
Right. But things happen. And so we just made it there a little faster than expected. So it's been growing, sometimes without even trying, which I love. And I'm watching things work at Almanac in a way that they do not work at being boss. And that's a really interesting difference between online and offline business these days, which I will be talking about in another episode too around this, because that's a really interesting insight that I think everyone needs to know what I know or understand what I see, because it is like night and day between the two businesses, and Almanac has really done its thing.
I'm curious to hear more about being boss. Just felt like such a personal project for both of us. We were very much front and center, the faces of it. And I know for me, since leaving being boss, it's kind of been really nice to be a little less front facing. Like, I will always love a camera. I will always love kind of being the center of attention. But since leaving being boss for me, I mean, a couple of things. One, it's been really nice to just kind of go behind the scenes a little bit more and just to get my hands in and do the work on branding and graphic design and all of the things that I'm best at. So I'm curious to hear more from you about that as it relates to Almanac. Are you front and center whenever it comes to Almanac, or are you looking forward to being a little bit more behind the scenes? What's that experience going to be like? Or what do you imagine that experience is going to be like for you?
Yeah, it's not even what it's going to be like. It's a playing factor in all of this, 100%. And it's something that really sort of came to a head for me last year. Last year, we were at being boss, sort of playing with a couple of options, still trying to like skirt around doing events. I was like, guys, I'm not doing events. We're going to have to do other things. Like, what are we going to do? And somebody was like, everyone's always wanted group coaching. Like, what would it be like if we did a group coaching? Team was super into it. We did it. We sold it. Launch did not go as well as I would have liked. It was a really great time. Super glad we did it. Went through 2 really great groups. But what I realized at that point, and it was so stark because Almanac, the store, was probably 6 months into being, if even that, at that point. And it was very clear to me, my role in the 2 businesses and just how different they were. Like, yes, I'm the owner, I'm strategizing, I'm like planning and putting things in place and all of these things. But at being boss, and I've mentioned this before around here at some point, at being boss, because it's still a very personal brand, and I've very intentionally taken my face away from the brand as much as I can, because it is still a very personal brand over the years. But at being boss, to sell anyone anything, more or less, I have to sell you 2 times. I have to sell you on me, first. And then I have to sell you on the thing, which is a lot of selling in general.
Mm-hmm.
An Almanac, you're just going to buy a rock.
Right.
I mean, there is a vibe for sure, and there is a product, but it is not the same thing. And so about a year ago, it really became really clear to me that being boss, I am here selling all the things. And I do have help with like selling sponsorships, but even then it's like my face on that podcast avatar. It is my voice on the thing. It is me, speaking the ads and all of these things. Whereas at Almanac, no one cares who I am or what I do. No one and I'm not selling anything unless I am doing a shift in the store, which happens maybe once a month. Right. And so the entire business of Almanac is constantly going, regardless of how really involved I am. Whereas at Being Boss, I am there like chugging it along constantly. And it's something that I see in all of my friends who have very personal brands or who are coaches or service providers or whatever it may be. There is this whole other level of being in the business that is required that I don't have to do at Almanac. And instead, I can use all that time strategizing and actually doing things that are moving the business forward in a way that makes me feel more impactful in that business than I do in this one, which is kind of trippy to think about. Whenever you think about a show that has like 12 million downloads and top of all the whatever it may be, I don't feel very impactful here. And I know that there's some self-limiting beliefs around and I probably wouldn't feel that way if I were actually interacting with our audience at events.
Right.
But there is still a difference. I know that the work that I do at Almanac is going to move us forward, whereas I have been explaining it for years. As being boss, I feel like I'm constantly pulling teeth.
Right.
Over and over again. So that has definitely played into it. I feel like a better business owner at Almanac, more capable of doing the work that I am here to do as a business owner at Almanac than I am at Being Boss. Settling yourself into the flow of your business, from navigating a whole year of ebbs and flows to embracing the energy of each and every day, you're bound to have some ups and downs along the way. For me, this journey of entrepreneurship is made better when my space keeps me focused and inspired. As an example, my favorite way to mark the beginning and ending of the workday is to light a candle when I sit down at my desk and then blow it out when I'm done for the day. It's a little ritual that creates boundaries and a vibe that keeps me focused and feeling cozy. And the ritual candle that we make at Almanac Supply Co. is my favorite for this. In fact, my whole shop is filled with items that I've curated to create the vibe for feeling connected, in flow, and inspired, with candles, crystals, and other goodies to help you create a dreamy workspace, bedside table, or bookshelf. Come gather inspiration and check out my favorite in-stock items at almanacsupplyco.com/beingboss and get 15% off with code BEINGBOSS at checkout. That's almanacsupplyco.com/beingboss.
That has certainly been my experience at Braid Creative in the past 3-4 years since leaving Being Boss. Our business has grown times 10 since I've been able to purely focus just on Braid Creative. So there is something to be said for, diversifying in business. And I'm sure that Almanac is not going to be your last business, but there is something to be said for being able to put all of your focus in one place. So how do you imagine putting all of your focus into Almanac? What do you imagine your days are going to look like?
Well, I've actually been experiencing that a little bit more over the past probably month or two because, as we do these episodes, I batch things. And so I actually haven't been recording and not even strategizing for really next episodes because I knew we were coming to the end of what this is at this moment. And so I've really been able to just be at Almanac and do my job there. And my God, the fun things that we have done. I've been able to dive into some really amazing projects and really make some great impact on what we're doing and do things that are legitimately fun. I'm not reinventing wheels and I'm not fixing things that shouldn't be broken, but because online business is what it is these days, everything is breaking all the time. Nothing works the same way. I'm able at Almanac to be a little more slow and a little more intentional and way more creative and purposeful with what I'm doing. And it feels amazeballs, like really great. And my calendar is so much more empty or empty of meetings and things, and so much more like full of like large blocks of time where I can do creative work, that I love it so far.
Yeah.
Absolutely love it. And the focusing really is a big part for me. We talked earlier in the year, our words of the year, and I very intentionally chose my word focus because I knew this was coming. And I knew that I needed to set that word for myself to like hold myself accountable to doing this, because I say all this and I love being boss. I love what we've built here. I have held on to this thing this long because I don't want to like, there is a part of me that does not want to let what we have been doing go. But if I could focus my energy on Almanac, holy shit, like that would be amazing. Like the impact that I could make in that company. Yes, 10 times growth. Absolutely. I will take that for sure. If a little bit of focus will take me there. And I think it can for sure. So I've definitely, and I want to say too that that's new for me as well. Of over the past year or so, and it's funny because I even think now I'm about at the age that you were, like in
Yeah.
years, when you were like, I can't, like, I don't want to split my focus. Like, I don't have the energy for it. Like, I'm there. I don't have the energy to split my focus between two things anymore. My like capacity to multi-plan has shrunk so much. And not even the capacity has shrunk. That's part of it. But like, I don't even want to. I don't want
Yeah.
to split my attention in that way anymore. I want to focus. So that's a bit of I'll call it a growth thing for me, is that I want to focus on just one thing, both because I like personally want to, and secondly, I want to make the impact that I can make when I do.
So I know that big changes can, for lack of better words, like hurt feelings, like it
Mm.
can, especially the feelings of our listeners, right? And so I know that our listeners felt a certain way whenever I left. And I know that listeners will feel a certain way hearing these big changes coming up. And I just want to acknowledge that it might hurt their feelings. And that's valid. Like it's totally valid because we have created parasocial relationships. Like your voice has been in their ears now for 5-6 years, however long it's been. They've come to know you. They've come to know us. And so I think that it's really valid to be a little bit sad whenever my favorite podcasters stop podcasting. I'm like, oh, like I'm going to miss them, and there's also the real relationships of all of the people that you and I have helped through either reading our book or buying the CEO Day kit or being in coaching with us or coming to the Being Boss vacations and having a really good time. And I suppose what I want those listeners to know is that this big change has nothing to do with them. It doesn't have anything to do with them in a way that, like you were making, like we're breaking up with you, right? Like, so it has everything to do with you, Emily, and kind of your vision for what's next. So I'm curious to hear, do you have anything that you want to say to listeners whenever it comes to making this huge change and what that's going to mean for them even?
I'm not breaking up with the audience by any means, and there are plans, right? I've One of the things that got me to this place, and one of the reasons too that I want to be in Almanac so much more, is this idea of assets, right? Of business assets that we've been working for. At at Almanac, I have a bank account made of crystals, right? Like I have physical assets that are worth dollar bills. And at Being Boss, one of the things that really got me a couple of years ago was that we have no physical assets. We've been busting our ass for almost a decade. And what do we have to show for it? I mean, and the people are amazing, amazing friendships for real. But like on a spreadsheet, if I were to go to accountant and they were be like, what are your assets? Like I own a couple of laptops, right? I got a really nice microphone. But there is like this digital asset that is this podcast feed, right? This podcast feed and all of its subscribers and downloads and like meta stuffs, right, is my most valuable asset in this company. It's not 100% going away. There are plans, and we'll be getting into that in the next couple of episodes. So I do want to say that. And it is one, because this is an asset, and two, because creating content in this way is something that I have done for so long that I can't imagine completely not doing it. Here is where the big changes are coming, though, is I am done with 2 industries. Done with them.
Let's hear it.
One is podcasting. Done with the podcasting industry. Period. When we come back, what we're going to be doing is going to be so different. And so I don't give a fuck when it comes to like what is standard in the podcasting industry and what sponsors expect from you in the podcasting industry. Like I'm going to come back and do this in a way that we've really never done it, which I'll talk about that a bit more. So I'm not leaving you. What I am leaving is podcasting as we know it. 2, the other industry that I am leaving is this like small business help industry.
Yeah.
In a way that I have felt for a couple of years. And it has less to do with, I mean, it has everything to do with a couple of things. One, I said it. Right? If you need any help on anything, there is an episode here somewhere where you can get exactly how I think about it. And you want to talk about sales or marketing or branding or hiring or firing or like any of hundreds of episodes, millions of downloads. It is here. It is absolutely here for you. And I can't keep having those conversations over and over again, or I'm going to go mad. Another is just like who I'm playing in my sandbox with. Not impressed, not interested, don't want to hang out with these folks, don't want to be associated with most of them. I don't want to be in the same crowd who's selling blueprints and courses with absolutely no value. It has made my job impossible to do what I want to do what I think you deserve when everyone else is underselling me, but also delivering zero value. Or very little value in a way that I don't want to play here anymore. I want to go play with rocks and crystals. I want to build manufacturing processes, and I want to grow my local like merchant council for my neighborhood. And I want to do those things that's going to bring a different kind of impact with people who are my peers that I respect in the things that they're doing. And so it's not about quitting my audience. It's about quitting these 2 industries and instead focusing on both creating content in a way that allows me to feel like I'm being creative and creating something for myself and my audience, not my sponsors. And even more for myself than my audience, which I think is everyone's like, what? You're not going to be listening to your audience/customers? Correct. For a very large...
that is like my number one branding tenet. Like I know that so many branding agencies are like, you cannot think about yourself. Like you just have to look at your dream customer and what it is that they want. And I wholeheartedly disagree. I think that whenever you are passionate and revved up about what you're doing, it will attract the people that it needs to attract.
Yeah.
So amen to that.
Yeah. So if your feelings are hurt, I'm sorry. If you're not paying my bills, I don't care. No, I'm glad that you've created some sort of attachment. If you are not like paying for this content or part of the community or bought CEO Day Kit or any of those things, like I don't need to hear about it. If you are part of my community, like my community, you are like part of the clubhouse, you are a CEO Day user, all of those things, keep listening because there are some fun things coming for sure. And the goal is not to like leave, like the community will still exist for at least some time beyond this. What is absolutely changing is this show. This show is making a big pivot. And it's because I want to get back to creating content in the way that I most want to create it. And I want to do content that I feel good about in a space that I feel good about. Also, my team is here for this because my team has been here helping me fix the broken wheels, right? Put out the fires, figure out the strategies in this small business space enough that they see that we're just spinning wheels. There is too much competition playing too many stupid games for anything of value to stand out at all. And so whenever we make the switch between Being Boss and Almanac, because they're working on both things, they love working on Almanac stuff because the things we do matter. Needles actually move. And I've seen this across, well, again, we'll talk about this more, but there's this difference between online, offline in this moment and like where you're sort of straddling that bridge if you are or whatever. Also, but like niching is something that has come up for me so much over the past couple of months. I know you have always been a huge fan of niching. I think relatively recently you were like, no, Jane of all trades, right?
I go back and forth constantly. I'm like, if you want to make money, you got a niche. If you want to learn how to be well-rounded and be able to do it all yourself as a business owner, you've got to figure out how to do it all. So I see actually, you know what? I see a case for both. And it's really just comes down to what it is that you want and what your vision for yourself is. I think you can do it both ways. But if you want to make money, like real money, you got a niche.
You got a niche. And I feel like for too long Being Boss, so actually, no, not even too long. Whenever Being Boss started, we were niche, right? We were two female podcasters, which like did not exist on the top charts of like business podcasts on Apple's. We were the first ones. Two female podcasters talking about business to creatives. No one else was doing that. We were like first out the gate. We were the niche. Now everyone and their brother is doing the same thing for the same people in the same way, saying the exact same things, more or less, right? We are no longer a niche. We are just one in the sea, right?
Right.
So the goal now is to re-niche. Is to stop being for all creative business owners, stop talking about all the topics for creative business, and instead get in there with our little wedge that we're already in.
Just be the business.
Yeah.
Just be the business.
Yeah. Just be the business and talk about things that we're seeing moves the needle, because that's actually been this lesson for me came through the past probably 18 months. The team and I have been doing a lot of work in search engine optimization, like a whole lot of work in SEO, both for Being Boss and on Almanac. And we started at Being Boss. Being Boss is the more sort of well-founded brand. We've been here longer. Our website has more content. Like we should be able to do the work there and get all the rankings we want with, little to no effort, more or less, ideally. And so we started, identifying what we were going to work on. We started doing it. Nothing was happening at all. And so we started diving into it, and really like too much competition. Like I'm up against Forbes and Entrepreneur and Inc. magazine and like all, if we're talking branding or marketing and that's just the couple big fish. There's like 40 million other smaller fish of varying sizes along the way. And we're just one. Almanac, we've been doing some SEO work. I feel like I'm cheating.
Right.
I'm just doing the work, but I'm doing it in such a niche that competition is not there and not playing on my level, because Crystal folks don't know SEO on the same level that a previous or like current, I guess, business podcaster knows SEO. And so literally for the team, watching us do work in one brand and it not matter, and it literally not matter, versus doing work in another brand and it literally making us dollar bills, has been the craziest thing to see. And in a way that I thought that getting them to transition over to Almanac was going to be hard. And I will say, like, Corey editing this, who you all have heard from, sad about this. He's probably more sad about this than I am, because Corey has been here from the beginning. And he'll stay. He's going to continue doing all the things that he's doing. But it's been easier to talk them into a transition because they see that when they work on things at Almanac, out of this podcast and small business not niche anymore, that their work actually matters in a way that it doesn't over here at all. So it's been a wild ride, and one that, like, when I think about what my feelings are around this, it is so maybe past time. Like, I'm so at peace with, like, these being the last couple episodes of this, like, version of Being Boss. I'll miss it, I think, a little bit, but, like, all in all, it's time. And if I hang on for another second, I've hung on too late or long or whatever.
Amen. Do the work, be boss.
And done. Well, actually, before we are done, I do want to let everyone know that Kathleen is coming back for one more episode. We're going to talk about podcasting industry. And this one, I think, could get a little juicy. I want to talk about, so think about, like, you know, our times with sponsors and, like, content creation.
I have so many things to say. Probably for me, the perspective coming from being a podcast listener, and you from being a podcast producer, and both of us having done all of the things with podcasting and hitting the right place at the right time and sponsor. Yes, I cannot wait to dive in on this one.
It's going to be a go. And sneak peek, I think the podcast industry is cannibalizing itself.
Oh, yeah.
Cannot wait to share more on that one. So definitely make sure you come back for the next one. And then I have 2 more episodes with my business besties about more of, like, what this decision has been like and what the future of this show and where my efforts are going is going to be, because we've talked about the end, and this is the end. This is the end of Being Boss as we know it, 100%. I'm done in a way that I feel really great about. And I feel like I've given you all everything I've got. But I'm not done. And this podcast feed is not done. And I will not diverge completely, but I will be focusing, niching in on an area that I don't think is going to surprise anybody, basically, once we actually get there. So thanks, Kathleen, for coming and digging this out of me. That sounds disgusting. I can't wait for the next one. It's going to be, I think, quite the ending.
Thanks for having me.
Decor for your office, gifts for your clients, celebrations for your own job well done. Find it all and more in our handmade candles and carefully curated collection of crystals and gifts at almanacsupplyco.com/beingboss and get 15% off with code beingboss at checkout. That's almanacsupplyco.com/beingboss. Now, until next time, do the work, be boss.
Yeah.